When we talk about attraction after 60, we must first dismantle the myth that attraction is owned by youth. That narrative has been sold for decades, that desirability peaks early and slowly fades, but that belief is not rooted in psychological reality. Attraction evolves, it matures, it becomes less impulsive and far more intentional. For many women, especially those over 50 or 60, attraction is no longer about surface-level beauty or physical perfection. It is about signals, subtle indicators of health, emotional stability, confidence, and psychological safety. In younger years, attraction can be driven by novelty, intensity, and even fantasy, but with age comes experience. Experience reshapes desire. Women over 60 have often navigated relationships, heartbreak, partnership, independence, caregiving, and self-discovery. They are not simply reacting to appearance anymore. They are assessing energy, demeanor, and how a man inhabits himself. Attraction becomes less about what looks impressive and more about what feels secure. At this stage of life, women are often drawn to signs of vitality rather than youth. Vitality is not about having a wrinkle, free face, or a perfectly sculpted body. It is about how someone carries himself. It is in the steadiness of movement, the alertness in conversation, the groundedness in presence. A man who appears engaged with life, curious, upright, attentive, sends a powerful signal. It communicates that he has not withdrawn from the world, that he remains emotionally and cognitively active. Psychologically, this matters because long-term attraction after 60 is deeply intertwined with safety. Safety does not mean boring, it means regulated. It means a man who is not volatile, not excessively reactive, not trapped in unresolved bitterness. Women at this stage are often sensitive to cues that signal emotional maturity. A calm tone of voice, measured responses, and comfortable silence can be far more attractive than grand gestures or flashy charm. There is also an awareness of health. Without saying it out loud, many women are attuned to signs of self-care. Is he attentive to his well-being? Does he move with strength? Does he appear to respect his body? These cues are not about vanity, they are about sustainability. Attraction becomes connected to partnership potential, shared experiences, and longevity. It becomes less about impressing and more about aligning. Another critical shift is the reduced tolerance for performative masculinity. In earlier decades, bravado or dominance might have been misinterpreted as confidence. Later in life, confidence looks different. It looks like ease. It looks like a man who does not need to compete with everyone in the room. It looks like someone who can listen without interrupting, who can disagree without escalating, who can laugh at himself. This kind of grounded confidence becomes magnetic because it signals psychological security. There is also the role of authenticity. Women over 60 often value congruence, the alignment between what a man says and how he behaves. Attraction becomes rooted in consistency. If his demeanor, words, and actions match, it builds trust. Trust fuels attraction in ways that physical attributes alone never could. In fact, inconsistency can rapidly diminish attraction, regardless of appearance. Importantly, attraction at this stage is often quieter. It is not always accompanied by dramatic butterflies or overwhelming infatuation. Instead, it may show up as comfort, curiosity, and ease. It may feel like relief at not having to decode mixed signals, relief at being met with respect. That emotional steadiness can be deeply appealing. We also cannot ignore self-perception. A man who carries himself with dignity and not arrogance, but dignity changes how he is perceived. Dignity reflects self-acceptance, and self-acceptance is compelling. When a man is comfortable with his age, his history, and his evolution, it reduces the emotional labor around him. Women notice when someone has made peace with himself. That peace becomes attractive because it feels stable. Attraction after 60, then, is not diminished, it is refined. It filters out superficial noise and tunes into deeper frequencies. It responds to indicators of resilience, emotional intelligence, and sustained engagement with life. Physical appearance still plays a role. Humans are visual beings, but it is filtered through psychological interpretation. A strong handshake might signal confidence, steady eye contact might signal honesty, good posture might signal vitality. The body becomes a messenger for the mind. Ultimately, Attraction in later life becomes less about chasing excitement and more about choosing alignment. It is intentional rather than impulsive, it is thoughtful rather than reactive, and perhaps most importantly, it is grounded in the desire for peace, respect, and shared emotional stability. Eyes are often described as the first point of connection between two people, but their importance becomes even more pronounced with age. Women are rarely evaluating eyes from a purely physical standpoint. It is not about color, shape, or perfection. What is being noticed is presence. Eyes communicate attention, emotional availability, and intention faster than words ever can. In many ways, they function as a psychological signal, a quiet indicator of how someone relates to the world and to others. With life experience comes a heightened sensitivity to authenticity. Women over 60 have often encountered charm that felt empty, attention that was inconsistent, or connection that was performative. Because of this, eye contact becomes a filtering mechanism. Steady, calm eye contact can signal sincerity. It suggests that a man is engaged in the moment, not distracted, not scanning the room, and not emotionally elsewhere. That sense of presence can feel grounding. There is also a difference between intense eye contact and regulated eye contact. Intensity can sometimes feel intrusive or performative, especially if it appears forced. Regulated eye contact, on the other hand, feels natural. It allows space, it communicates confidence without pressure. Women often notice whether eye contact feels comfortable or demanding, because that experience mirrors how communication with that person may feel overall. Eyes also reveal emotional regulation. Small cues, softness in expression, patience while listening, responsiveness rather than reactivity can signal a nervous system that is settled. Emotional regulation becomes particularly attractive later in life because many women prioritize stability over unpredictability. When a man's eyes reflect calm attention rather than agitation or impatience, it suggests that interactions with him may feel safe and respectful. Another important aspect is attentiveness. Eye contact communicates listening without interruption. It signals that a woman's words are being received rather than waited out. This matters because feeling heard is strongly tied to attraction in mature relationships. When someone appears attentive, it reduces emotional labor. Women notice when they do not have to compete for attention, and that experience can create immediate positive impressions. Eyes can also communicate kindness. Kindness is not always expressed verbally. It is often visible in micro-expressions, warmth, empathy, and responsiveness. Women frequently pick up on these cues quickly. A man whose eyes soften when someone speaks, who shows curiosity rather than judgment, signals emotional accessibility. Emotional accessibility is a powerful attractor because it suggests the possibility of connection without defensiveness. There is also the role of confidence. Avoidant eye contact can sometimes be interpreted as discomfort, insecurity, or disengagement, although context always matters. Conversely, comfortable eye contact signals self-assurance. It suggests that a man is not hiding, not guarded in a rigid way, and not overly concerned with impression management. This kind of quiet confidence tends to be perceived as trustworthy. At this stage of life, many women are especially sensitive to congruence, the alignment between verbal communication and nonverbal cues. Eyes play a major role in this. If words express interest but eye contact appears distant, the inconsistency is often noticed quickly. On the other hand, when eye contact matches tone and behavior, it reinforces authenticity. Authenticity strengthens attraction because it reduces uncertainty. There is also a subtle signal of curiosity. Curious eyes suggest engagement with life. They reflect openness rather than rigidity. Women often notice whether a man appears interested in learning, exploring conversation, and understanding perspectives. Curiosity communicates vitality, and vitality is attractive at any age. It signals that someone has not emotionally shut down. Importantly, eye contact can shape the emotional climate of an interaction. Warm, attentive eyes can create ease within seconds. They can make conversation feel collaborative rather than transactional. This emotional tone matters because attraction later in life is closely tied to how interactions feel, not just how someone looks. The nervous system responds to these cues almost instantly. Eyes also reflect self-acceptance. A man who is comfortable with himself tends to have relaxed eye contact. There is less performance, less pressure to prove something. Women often perceive this as emotional steadiness. Emotional steadiness reduces anxiety in social interactions and creates space for genuine connection to develop. Ultimately, what women notice in the eyes is not appearance but information. Information about presence, regulation, attentiveness, kindness, confidence, and authenticity. Eyes become a shorthand for deeper psychological qualities. They help answer an unspoken question: does this person feel safe to talk to be around, to connect with? That is why eyes are often one of the first things noticed. They communicate before words, and they reveal what performance cannot fully hide. In mature attraction, where experience has refined perception, those signals carry significant weight. Presence in the eyes does not guarantee connection, but its absence is often felt immediately. Posture communicates information long before a conversation begins. It reflects not only physical habits but also psychological patterns, how a person carries stress, confidence, fatigue, and engagement with life. Women often notice posture almost instantly because it serves as a visual summary of vitality and self-relationship. Especially after 60, posture is rarely interpreted as a cosmetic detail. Instead, it is read as a signal of energy, resilience, and presence. An upright posture tends to communicate awareness. It suggests that a man is oriented toward the world rather than withdrawn from it. This does not mean rigid or overly formal positioning. In fact, stiffness can signal tension. What is often noticed is natural alignment, shoulders relaxed, head balanced, movements intentional. This kind of posture reflects comfort within one's body, and that comfort can feel reassuring to others. There is also a strong association between posture and vitality. Vitality is not defined by age, but by engagement. The way someone walks into a room, sits during conversation, or stands while listening conveys whether they are alert or disengaged. Women frequently interpret posture as an indicator of how someone is experiencing life internally. A person who appears physically present often signals mental presence as well. Posture can also communicate confidence. But mature confidence looks different from performative dominance. It is not about occupying space aggressively. It is about steadiness. A man who sits or stands with ease signals that he is not trying to prove something. That lack of performance can be appealing because it reduces social pressure. It suggests authenticity rather than impression management. Another layer women may notice is the relationship between posture and emotional history. Over time, people develop physical patterns that mirror psychological experiences. Chronic stress, defensiveness, or long-term exhaustion can subtly shape how someone holds their body. Conversely, self-awareness and intentional self-care often appear in more open, relaxed posture. While no one consciously analyzes this in detail, the nervous system often registers these cues automatically. Movement is closely tied to posture. It is not only how a man stands, but how he transitions, getting up from a chair, walking, turning towards someone, speaking. Smooth, deliberate movement can signal coordination and attentiveness. It suggests that a person is connected to his body rather than disconnected from it. That connection often reads as groundedness, which many women associate with emotional stability. There is also the signal of self-respect. Posture can reflect how someone perceives himself. A man who carries himself with quiet dignity, again, not stiffness but intention, communicates that he values himself. Self-respect tends to influence how others perceive value. Women often notice when someone appears to have given up on how he presents himself physically, because that can hint at broader disengagement. Effort, even subtle effort, signals investment in life. Importantly, posture affects the emotional tone of interactions. Open posture can feel inviting. It suggests approachability and willingness to engage. Closed posture, crossed arms combined with physical withdrawal, for example, may be interpreted as guardedness, even if that is not the intention. Women frequently respond to how interactions feel somatically, not just cognitively. Posture contributes significantly to that feeling. Health is another layer, though often implicit. Posture can hint at mobility, strength, and self-care routines. Again, this is not about perfection or athleticism. It is about sustainability. Signs that someone maintains basic physical awareness can signal that shared activities, independence, and everyday life may feel easier. Attraction later in life often includes these practical considerations, even when they remain unspoken. There is also the role of emotional regulation. A regulated nervous system often produces more relaxed posture. Tension, agitation, or hypervigilance can show up physically through tight shoulders, restless movement, or rigidity. Women who have life experience often pick up on these cues quickly because they influence how safe and comfortable an interaction feels. Calm posture can create calm interaction. Consistency matters as well. Posture that remains relatively steady across situations, conversation, listening, movement can signal authenticity. If posture shifts dramatically depending on who is present, it may feel performative. Women frequently notice congruence between physical presence and communication style. Alignment between the two strengthens impressions of reliability. It is also important to acknowledge that posture is not fixed. Small adjustments can significantly change perception because posture influences not only how others see a man, but also how he experiences himself. Physical alignment can affect breathing, voice tone, and emotional expression. Women may not consciously identify posture as the reason they feel comfortable around someone, but it often contributes to that comfort. Ultimately, posture is read as a story. Not a definitive story, but a collection of signals about vitality, confidence, self-respect, and emotional presence. It is less about physical perfection and more about engagement with life. Women notice whether a man appears oriented toward connection, attentive to his body, and comfortable occupying his space. That is why posture carries weight in first impressions. It communicates before words, and it reinforces what words later attempt to express. In mature attraction, where subtle cues matter more than dramatic displays, posture becomes a quiet but powerful form of communication. Hands often communicate details about a person's life that words never explicitly reveal. Women tend to notice hands not from a place of superficial judgment, but because hands carry signals about care, lifestyle, gentleness, and attention to detail. Especially after 60, these signals become more meaningful because attraction is closely tied to how someone lives day to day rather than how they present in a single moment. One of the first impressions hands can create is related to self-care. Well-maintained hands, clean nails, basic grooming, signs of attention suggest that a man has not disengaged from caring for himself. This does not imply perfection or luxury. It implies awareness. Awareness of personal hygiene often translates psychologically into broader self-respect. Women frequently interpret this as a sign that a person values his well-being and environment. Hands also tell a story about lifestyle. They may reflect work history, hobbies, creativity, or activity levels. Rather than being judged negatively, visible signs of life experience can feel grounding. What is often noticed is congruence, whether a man appears comfortable with his history. Hands that reflect a life lived, paired with ease rather than self-consciousness, can communicate authenticity. Authenticity tends to be attractive because it reduces performance. There is also a strong association between hands and gentleness. Hands symbolize how someone interacts with the world physically, how he handles objects, gestures during conversation, or expresses warmth. Women often observe whether movements appear careful, abrupt, restless, or calm. These small behavioral cues can shape perceptions about emotional style. Gentle, intentional movements frequently signal patience and emotional regulation. Touch, even at a symbolic level, plays a role in perception. A handshake, for example, can communicate presence, confidence, and attentiveness. It is not about firmness alone, but about attunement, whether the gesture feels respectful and appropriate. Women may notice whether physical interactions feel comfortable or overly performative. That experience can influence how safe connection feels. Hands also reveal attentiveness to detail. Small details, trimmed nails, clean skin, subtle grooming, suggest that a man notices things. This noticing often extends beyond appearance. Psychologically, attention to detail can signal reliability and conscientiousness. Women who value stability often respond positively to cues that someone is attentive in everyday life, not just during important moments. Movement patterns matter as much as appearance. Restless hands may signal anxiety or distraction, while overly rigid hands may signal tension. Calm, natural movement can communicate groundedness. Groundedness is frequently associated with emotional steadiness, which becomes particularly attractive later in life when many women prioritize ease over intensity. Hands can also signal engagement with life. Hands used expressively in conversation often reflect enthusiasm, curiosity, and presence. They show that someone is participating rather than withdrawing. This participation can be subtle but meaningful because attraction after 60 is closely tied to vitality, the sense that a person remains interested in connection and communication. There is an element of trust embedded in how women perceive hands. Hands represent action, words describe intention, but hands execute behavior. Because of this, women may unconsciously interpret hands as indicators of how someone behaves in practical situations, whether he is careful, supportive, attentive, or dismissive. These interpretations happen quickly and often outside conscious awareness. Another layer involves consistency between appearance and behavior. Hands that appear cared for but are used in impatient or abrupt ways can create dissonance. Conversely, hands that reflect effort and are used with attentiveness reinforce impressions of authenticity. This alignment strengthens attraction because it signals predictability, and predictability supports emotional safety. Hands also reflect independence, the ability to manage daily tasks, maintain personal care, and move comfortably through physical environments becomes more relevant with age. Women may notice whether a man appears capable and self-sufficient, not from a critical standpoint but from a partnership perspective. Independence reduces the emotional and practical strain within relationships, making it an attractive quality. Importantly, the perception of hands is rarely isolated. It exists within the broader context of presence, posture, and communication. Hands amplify other signals. Warm eye contact combined with calm gestures reinforces kindness. Upright posture combined with steady hand movement reinforces confidence. These cues work together to create an overall impression. Hands also carry symbolic meaning related to reassurance. Gentle gestures, open palms, and relaxed movement can create a sense of ease in conversation. That ease contributes to emotional comfort, which strongly influences attraction in mature relationships. Women often remember how interactions felt physically, not just what was said. Ultimately, what women notice about hands is not perfection but information. Information about care, gentleness, attentiveness, lifestyle, and emotional regulation. Hands function as messengers for daily behavior, the ordinary moments that define real relationships. Because mature attraction is rooted in everyday experience, these subtle cues become significant. In this way, hands quietly communicate how someone moves through the world. They reveal patterns of care, presence, and interaction. Women notice these signals quickly, not as a checklist, but as part of a broader intuitive process that shapes whether connection feels comfortable, respectful, and sustainable. Overall, grooming and style often communicate something far deeper than appearance. Women rarely interpret grooming as a measure of fashion knowledge or trend awareness, especially after 60. Instead, grooming is read as a signal of effort, self-respect, and psychological engagement with life. It reflects whether a man is paying attention to how he shows up in the world, not to impress others, but to honor himself. One of the first messages grooming sends is effort. Effort is attractive because it signals intention. Clean clothes, basic hygiene, and thoughtful presentation suggest that a man has not disengaged from himself. This does not require expensive clothing or a dramatic sense of style. In fact, simplicity often communicates clarity. When grooming appears intentional but not performative, it suggests balance and awareness of self without excessive concern about external validation. Grooming also reflects self-respect. The way someone cares for his appearance can mirror how he values his well-being. Women often notice whether a man appears comfortable investing small amounts of time into himself. This investment suggests stability. It indicates that daily routines exist, that self, care has not been abandoned, and that he maintains a relationship with his own needs. Self-respect tends to influence how others feel around someone because it sets the tone for mutual respect. There is also the role of consistency. Occasional effort can feel situational, but consistent grooming signals reliability. Reliability is highly attractive later in life because it reduces uncertainty. Women often respond to patterns whether someone shows up in a similar way across different contexts. Consistent grooming communicates that a man's self-care is part of his identity rather than something he performs only when observed. Style in this stage of life is less about fashion and more about coherence. Coherence means that clothing, grooming, and demeanor align with personality. When style feels authentic, it communicates confidence without words. Women tend to notice when someone appears comfortable in what he wears because comfort signals self-acceptance. Self-acceptance reduces social tension and makes interactions feel easier. Grooming can also signal emotional state. Neglecting appearance over long periods may be interpreted as disengagement, fatigue, or loss of motivation, even when the reasons are complex. Conversely, small signs of care, neatly maintained hair, clean shoes, simple coordination, suggest engagement with daily life. Engagement is attractive because it reflects vitality. Vitality communicates that a person remains invested in living, connecting, and participating. There is a psychological component related to boundaries. A man who maintains grooming often signals that he respects environments and social spaces. He understands context. Women frequently interpret this as social awareness, the ability to adapt appropriately without losing authenticity. Social awareness contributes to comfort because it reduces awkwardness and unpredictability. Another important layer is dignity. Dignity is different from vanity. It is quiet, steady, and rooted in self-acceptance. Grooming can reflect dignity when it appears intentional yet relaxed. Women often notice men who carry themselves with this quiet care because it suggests emotional maturity. Emotional maturity includes accepting aging without withdrawing from self-expression. Grooming also interacts with perception of health. Basic presentation can signal energy levels, routine, and organization. Again, this is not about perfection. It is about sustainability. Women often evaluate whether someone appears capable of maintaining everyday life, shared activities, social events, and routines. Grooming becomes one visible indicator of that capability. Style can communicate personality without words. Simple choices, color preferences, clothing fit, neatness can hint at traits like creativity, practicality, openness, or structure. Women may not consciously analyze these details, but they contribute to the overall impression. When style feels intentional, it suggests that a man knows himself. Self-knowledge is attractive because it reduces confusion in relationships. There is also the role of adaptability. Grooming that fits different settings, casual, social, or formal, signals flexibility. Flexibility suggests emotional and social intelligence. Women often value this because relationships require adjustment and responsiveness. A man who can present himself appropriately without appearing uncomfortable communicates ease with change. Importantly, grooming influences how a man experiences himself internally. When someone feels put together, posture shifts, communication changes, and confidence often becomes more natural. Women respond to that internal shift as much as the external presentation. The attraction is not to clothing itself, but to the energy that intentional self-care creates. Grooming is also tied to presence. Taking a few moments to prepare signals that an interaction matters. It communicates respect for the moment and the people involved. Women frequently notice when effort feels relational rather than performative, when it appears that a man values shared space and connection. Ultimately, overall grooming and style function as quiet communication. They signal effort, self-respect, emotional engagement, dignity, and awareness. They tell a story about daily habits and mindset. Women are not looking for perfection or trendiness. They are noticing whether a man appears connected to himself and invested in life. In mature attraction, these subtle signals carry weight because they suggest sustainability. Grooming reflects routines, routines reflect stability, and stability supports connection. What is being noticed is not style alone, but the intention behind it. the decision to continue showing up with care, clarity, and quiet confidence.